If tomorrow the Ayatollah regime fell, who would govern Iran? This simple question in shape hides a complex answer, with deep roots in more than 2 centuries of revolutions, blows, dictatorships, monarchies, foreign interventions, and, of course, a lot of instability. The truth is that the current crisis that Iran lives is not just the result of recent decisions or international sanctions. It is the latest chapter of a turbulent political soap opera that began over 200 years ago. The modern history of Iran begins with the Qajar dynasty in the 19th century, a monarchy that already suffered from strong foreign influence, especially from Russia and the United Kingdom. In the early 20th century, the country was seen as a fragile territory, divided between external interests and internal conflicts. Until, in 1925, a strong and ambitious man decided to change everything. Reza Khan. Reza Khan, later crowned as Reza Shah Pahlavi, took over the throne and launched a bold project of Iran's modernization and secularization. Roads, schools, railways, factories, all this began to emerge quickly. But along with progress came the repression. Civil freedoms were reduced, the silenced political opposition, and the Shiite clerics, former owners of moral influence on the people, became declared enemies of the new Shah. The shock between the secular state and the religious already gave signs that sooner or later the gunpowder barrel would explode. World War II became another important page of this story. Iran, by its strategic position and its oil reserves, has become a vital point for allies. British and Soviet troops occupied the country, and Reza Shah, accused of sympathizing with the Nazis, was forced to abdicate. Who took over the throne was his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Young, inexperienced, but willing to continue the modernization project of the father. During the 1950s and 60s, the new Shah launched the so-called White Revolution, a package of social and economic reforms that included land reform, the right to vote for women, and the modernization of education. At first glance, it seemed the right way to development. But there was a problem. The religious elite, traditional traders, and even part of the middle class began to see the Shah as a puppet of the West. For Shiite clerics, the westernization of Iran was a direct offense to the Islamic identity of the country. On the other hand, leftist movements, students, and nationalists were also unhappy. They accused the Shah of corruption, authoritarianism, and being a puppet from the United States. It is in this context that a figure that would change the fate of Iran arises. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Exile, but with messages that crossed borders, Khomeini denounced the Shah regime as corrupt, oppressor, and enemy of Islam. Its popularity grew as the repression of the Shah became increasingly brutal. In 1979, the inevitable happened. After months of protests, general strikes, and bloodshed, the Shah was forced to flee, and so the Islamic Republic of Iran was born. A new regime led by the clerics, with Khomeini at the maximum power post. With Khomeini's arrival at power, Iran has undergone a radical transformation. The country that once walked to westernized modernization now became a theocratic republic, where the principles of Shiite Islam have come to dominate all spheres of government and social life. The new political system concentrated the supreme power in the hands of the supreme leader, initially Khomeini, and, after his death in 1989, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Under this new structure, the president and parliament came to have limited functions, always subordinate to the will of the supreme leader and the Guardians' Council. Over the following decades, the Ayatollah regime has faced numerous challenges: wars, international sanctions, economic crises, popular revolts, and an increasingly disconnected youth of the ideals of the Islamic Revolution. Even so, the system has managed to maintain itself, often through the repression and manipulation of elections. However, in recent years, Iran's internal situation has been rapidly deteriorated. The economy sank under the weight of the sanctions imposed by the United States and the international community. The national currency, the rial, lost value dramatically. Unemployment, especially among young people, fired. And the population, increasingly connected to the outside world through the internet, began to demand profound changes. In the midst of this scenario of popular dissatisfaction, a name has gained prominence: Reza Pahlavi, the son of the last namesake of Iran. Living in exile since the 1979 revolution, Reza Pahlavi built his career as a political activist, always criticizing the theocratic regime and defending a transition to democracy. Contrary to what many could imagine, Pahlavi says does not propose the return to an absolutist monarchy. Its proposal, in fact, is to establish a constitutional monarchy system along the lines of European parliamentary monarchies, such as those of the United Kingdom, Spain, or Sweden. In this model, the king would have only ceremonial functions, while royal power would be performed by a democratically elected parliament. Reza Pahlavi argues that his figure represents a bridge between the past and the future of Iran. On the one hand, he carries the historical weight of the Pahlavi dynasty, which ruled the country for over half a century. On the other hand, he presents himself as a defender of human rights, freedom of expression, and separation between religion and state. According to him, the main priority is now to overthrow the theocratic regime and start a process of democratic transition, in which the Iranian people, through a referendum, would decide whether to want a republic, a parliamentary monarchy, or another model of government. But Reza Pahlavi's proposal faces huge obstacles. Within Iran, it is a little-known figure, especially among the younger ones. Many have not even lived during the Shah regime and have only negative reports about that time, reinforced by the official propaganda that demonized the Pahlavi family for over 40 years. In addition, sectors of the Iranian left, nationalists, and even some liberals are suspicious of any solution involving the return of a monarchy figure. In the international scenario, the situation is also delicate. Although Western countries welcome a possible fall in the Ayatollah regime, few are willing to be directly involved in a process of restoration of the monarchy or sponsorship open to Reza Pahlavi. Foreign powers have learned, with the disastrous example of Iraq post-Saddam Hussein, that regime transitions can easily immerse a country into chaos. Another factor of uncertainty is the transition process itself. There is no unified internal opposition in Iran. There are dozens of groups with different views for the country's future. Liberals, nationalists, minority ethnic groups, political exiles, Islamic reformists, and even monarchists. Fragmentation is such that any sudden collapse of the current regime could make room for a vacuum of dangerous power. The risk of a civil war, sectarian conflicts, or the rise of extremist groups is real and worries both Iranians and the international community. Reza Pahlavi tries to build bridges with different opposition sectors, calling on dialogues and appealing to unity around a common goal: the overthrow of theocracy and the construction of a democratic Iran. He has recently made intense use of social networks and international media platforms to publicize his message, especially after the major protests of 2022 and 2023, when thousands of young Iranians went to the streets to demand freedom, justice, and the end of the oppressive regime. Even with all this movement, the possibility of a peaceful and stable transition remains unknown. Some believe that Reza Pahlavi could be the face of a new Iran. Others see it as a figure of the past, without real representativeness. However, what no one denies is that Iran's political future is open as it has never been in recent decades. While the debate about Iran's political future is still intense, a scenario of uncertainty hangs over the country. As much as Reza Pahlavi presents himself as a viable option, there are several other opposition actors with different views for post-regime. Among them are secular Republican groups, which advocate the creation of a democratic and totally secular republic, without any connection with the monarchy or the clergy. There are also ethnic minority movements such as Kurds, Arabs, and Azeris, which require more autonomy or even independence in certain regions of Iran. In addition, we must not forget the Islamic reformists, who, despite critics of the current system, still believe that Islam should play a relevant role in the government, but with a more moderate and less authoritarian approach. The fear of a vacuum of power is real. Just look at the neighborhood of Iran to understand why. The fall of authoritarian regimes in the Middle East in recent decades, such as Iraq, Libya, and Syria, has left traces of civil war, terrorism, and state fragmentation. A poorly planned transition in Iran could cause the same kind of disaster. This is precisely why many analysts and diplomats argue that any change of regime in Iran must be carefully negotiated, with the participation of different sectors of Iranian society and the support of the international community. Reza Pahlavi, in turn, insists that the solution must come from inside. He argues that the Iranians themselves conduct the transition process, avoiding external interference that, according to him, have always brought more problems than solutions to the country. He has recently intensified his campaign for a referendum, where the people would decide Iran's future political system. The idea is simple: to overthrow the current regime and give the people the right to choose between republic, constitutional monarchy, or other model. The big challenge, however, is how to carry out this referendum in the midst of a government that still represses demonstrations, censors the press, and controls major security institutions. Another delicate point is the role of the armed forces and Revolutionary Guard. These groups are today the dorsal spine of the Ayatollah regime. Many military personnel have direct benefits of the current system: economic privileges, positions of power, and political immunity. A transition will only be viable if there is somehow an agreement with these sectors or an internal division that weakens resistance to change. Without this, any attempt to overthrow the regime can result in even more violent repression or even a civil war. In addition, the international community observes carefully. Countries like the United States, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and European powers have clear strategic interests in the region. Iran's future can directly affect issues such as the Iranian nuclear program, the power balance in the Middle East, and the price of oil in the global market. Therefore, it is likely that any transition process count, directly or indirectly, with the influence of these nations. But despite all the difficulties, one thing is undeniable: the wear of the Ayatollah regime is evident. The advanced age of the supreme leader, their Khamenei, and the lack of clear succession further increase political tension. Popular protests, which have intensified in recent years, show that a large portion of the population is no longer afraid to challenge the government. Movements such as Woman, Life, Freedom, which gained strength after Mahsa Amini's death in 2022, are clear examples of this change of mindset among the Iranians. In the end, the question continues to echo: if the Ayatollah regime falls, who will govern Iran? A constitutional monarchy with Reza Pahlavi as a symbol? A democratic and secular republic? A coalition of opposition forces? Or will the country dive into another cycle of instability, violence, and uncertainties? Iran's future remains open. The world observes, and the Iranian people, once again, is the one who will pay the price of the choices that are coming.